The last few years of my life have been full of highs, trips, and life-changing experiences. First it was weed, then shrooms, on past peyote and acid, and finally to Datura. The elusive Datura is, as it turns out, not so elusive in the city of Austin, Texas. A year back some of my friends, looking for a new kind of trip, discovered Datura growing in the yard of a neighbor. They made tea from it and had what they said to be a strange, scary, yet awesome experience. At the time I was still striving to sample LSD and decided to stay away from Datura. But as time went on I too desired a different trip. It was April, 2004. 2 days after the conclusion of the local Bob Marley Fest, the day after a bud-filled 420. A friend and I went to the house where the Datura was said to be found. Having researched the plant and its appearance, we easily identified it and dug up 3 plants, taking the root bulbs, the leaves, the seed pods, and the flowers. We then took our prize back to my house. My parents were asleep so we commenced in brewing a tea. We chopped up 2 of the root bulbs, 2 seed pods, and about 8 good-sized leaves. We then threw that in a pot with 3 cups of water and let it boil on medium heat for about an hour and a half. We then strained it until it came to about 1½ cups of dark amber liquid. Both of us drank about 2 to 3 shots of the liquid and sat down to watch the movie Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. About halfway through the movie my friend got up to get a glass of water, commenting that his mouth was incredibly dry. It was only when he said this that I realized my mouth too was really dry. We went into the kitchen and both got cold glasses of water. We continued this way for a while, constantly drinking. About an hour and 15 minutes after I had drunk the tea, I began to feel almost drunk. My movements were stiff and I once ran into the side of the doorway when walking through it. About the time the movie ended my friend said he had to go outside to take piss. After he left things began to change. The room around me seemed to be enveloped in a haze. Dave Chappelle's face started to melt on the screen of the TV, then the whole screen seemed to drip out of the box. Slightly alarmed by this new development, I left the living room and walked down the hall to my room. Upon arriving in my room, I turned on some music and lit up a joint. As I was sitting in the easy chair, the joint in my hand abruptly vanished, enlightening me to the fact that there had never been a joint. As I was sitting there trying to come to terms with the fact that I had been smoking an imaginary joint and wondering what had ever happened to my friend, the room around me began to breath. Walls moving in and out rhythmically, and a strange, high-pitched screaming in the distance. Without warning, tiny 6-inch tall green men began to materialize all around my feet. They appeared to be busy little fellows, seeing as how they were scurrying this way and that. I walked from my room to the front yard, where I saw my friend standing in the street having a conversation with my mom's car. It turns out there was a woman on the car, with whom he talked for about an hour. About this time, many people began to appear to me, some I recognized and some I did not. The night from here on out was only a haze, though I vaguely remember dancing with new tree spirits, and playing chess in the middle of the street with my friend and an assortment of strange beings. Overall, my experience with Datura was peaceful and enchanting. It is a drug both dangerous and magical, and it can change one's life, and their perception of the world in which we live. Here's how it happened. It all started when I heard about this plant that grew right in my neighborhood. My one friend named Jared, who had ate about 200 seeds before, said that this plant is really bad stuff. It will make you hallucinate for days, he told me. He said not to do it, but I was kind of interested and curious because I wanted to try something that would give me bizarre hallucinations just once. So I said, where is it located? He showed me where it grew. He gave me 1 seed pod. He said you should really research it first and be careful. After hearing that, my thoughts on the drug were kind of negative and I was not sure if it was worth it. Days later I still was kind of interested in it, so I decided to look it up on the internet to find out what all the effects are. He told me just to type in Devil's Trumpet in the search engine. After reading about it my thoughts were still negative, but still the curiosity part of my brain was making me think, hey, I will just try it. Once I know enough about it I will just take a low dose. So the next day I told one of my other friends whose name is Jay about it. Almost immediately he was interested, so we went to the plant. I of course warned him about it and said take a low dose, so we each took about 10 seeds. Only I pretended to eat them, but really spit each one out when he was not looking. I did not trust it. Later that night we met up with some other friends. Every 5 minutes I was curious and asking did he feel it. Most of the time he said no. Later that night we smoked about 5 fat joints of Hymedes in my one friend's shed. I was so high I did not even think about asking Jay if he was feeling it. I did however notice he was very quiet, nervous looking, and his eyes were quite wide. I was having a really good weed high, so I did not even think about what he was doing. I did notice little things though. He did not talk at all. He walked as if he was slightly uncoordinated and looked confused. Eventually we reached his house. I said, well, I think I am going to my house, get some sleep later. He just nodded and did not say anything to me and stumbled back to his house. The next day I met up with him again and asked him, by the way, so did you ever feel the trip? He said he actually did start to hallucinate. He told me how creepy it was, how he just wanted it gone. He said he would not recommend it, but yet I still was interested and curious. Later that day we smoked a couple of fat joints of KB, my favorite type of weed. The next day I really wanted to try it. As I was walking I had just run into another one of my friends, actually my sister's boyfriend, whose name was A. Was cool with him. I told him all about the plant. He has tried acid before, so he was immediately interested in it and said let's do it, and I was like sure. I don't know what it was, for some reason I just said today is the day I will do it. The hidden fear I have had of it had left me. So we went to the plant. We picked off one nice sized seed pod for the both of us. He broke it open, which exposed at least over 100 seeds, which were in the color of a deep yellowish brown. I had read that the black ones were the most potent because they are dried out. I said to myself that hey, these can't be nearly as bad as the black ones, so I took about 10 seeds, put them in my mouth and swallowed, and awaited for Datura to take me into its world. A took the same amount. He asked when should we start feeling this. I said it should hit us in 30 to 60 minutes. About 10 minutes into it I started to feel something, but it felt like really good marijuana high. I felt laughy, lightheaded, and somewhat dizzy, but I was not hallucinating. It was like 8:22 p.m., around 47 minutes after we took the seeds, and still no hallucinations. I asked Tay if he was feeling it. He said no. I said to myself I think we need a larger dose, so we went back and grabbed another large spiny seed pod. As we were walking we broke it open and decided to eat another 10 seeds. It was about 8:31 p.m. In about 20 minutes the trip was starting on me, but it was weak. All the hallucinations I experienced were nothing but flashing colors, large bright flashes in the night sky. It was nothing but a light shroom trip. The both of us, being disappointed, headed back to our houses, agreeing to try a larger dose tomorrow. Morning came. It was Thursday. I had to get ready for school. As soon as I got home I met up with my one friend Mike, who was somewhat curious to try it, so it was agreed we would both do a nice sized dose of the seeds today. We retrieved about 2 pods, broke them open. I started out by eating about 30 seeds. He just ate a handful and did not count. About 5 minutes in I felt that damn weed high again, which was not what I wanted. Mike was feeling the same even after walking around for like an hour until we ran into A, so we started to walk around with him. I was kind of frustrated, so I said, yo, you want to eat some more seeds? He agreed, and I agreed to kick up the dose even more to feel some bizarre feelings. As we were walking up to the spot we ran into another one of our friends, Kevin, and we told him about the seeds as well, and he also wanted to do a little experimenting. So he took us up to the spot. As he drove us there in his car, my one friend Mike said he did not want any more and went home to eat dinner, so he left and we continued onward. We grabbed about 4 pods and started to break them open and consume them in the car. Unlike the occasional blunt cruises I used to have, we were having a Datura cruise. I just kept on consuming handfuls of seeds as A was doing the same. However, Kevin the driver did not want to take too many, seeing as how he had to drive. Era would note, driving while intoxicated, tripping, or extremely sleep deprived is dangerous and irresponsible because it endangers other people. Don't do it. At some point I said alright, that's enough. I was not even aware of how many I took. It had to be like 140 to 170, I would guess. In around 20 minutes it was starting to hit me as well as everyone else in the car. I started getting headaches, dizziness, a dry throat, cotton mouth, and my vision was slightly blurred as well. For the moment it felt like a really good weed high, but slightly different. I was enjoying it though, having fun laughing. As we reached the neighborhood of where we were picking up one of Kevin's friend named Brandon, I was starting to experience new sensations from these seeds, such as feeling out of it, increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, and auditory hallucinations, hearing voices and sounds. I actually had more symptoms start to pop up. I started feeling like I was drunk, sluggish, disoriented, dreamy, and every time I talked I mumbled somewhat, but could still speak somewhat clearly. I still was not having a bad trip or getting scared. I was going along with it, enjoying it. I mean, I have been high, been drunk, and I have done magic mushrooms before, so it was not that bad yet. Our next destination was to head up to the mall to get something to eat from the food court. As we were getting closer I was starting to zone out a little bit and go into a trance. Kevin would tap me and I would get startled as if I was starting to have a nightmare. They found it funny seeing as how they were also intoxicated. I was not scared, I just had this weird sensation, but it was cool to me at the moment. As we pulled up in the mall parking lot, as soon as I stepped out of the car I almost fell straight to the ground as if I was really trashed. My balance was impaired a lot, so I felt really weird now. But it was still pretty cool. As I stumbled up to the entrance with them, I started to have visual hallucinations, skin flushes, confusion, and paranoid feelings that everyone was viewing me. In the back of my mind though, I still knew the reason I was feeling this way was because of the Datura, so I still thought it was not that bad. I was seeing stuff like multiple blinking lights in the sky, color flashes, cars and people that would disappear into thin air, giant beetles, weird aircrafts, people who have a missing head, arm, leg, etc., and some images would look wavy and liquidly. I was still keeping my cool though. All the way up to the food court I did not say much, seeing as how I had incoherent speech. I mumbled a lot. As I went up to order my food, I had to lean on the counter to maintain balance, and it took like 10 minutes for the worker to understand what the hell I wanted. I came to the table where Kevin and everyone else was sitting to eat. As I started to try to eat a couple of fries, I felt sick to my stomach and could not finish it. What a waste of money. As we were walking out of the mall, I thought of every object in the mall as being alive and watching me. I would occasionally start searching the ground thinking I had dropped something and would realize again I was hallucinating. The weirdest thing, but in a cool way I would say, was when I would be walking, all of a sudden I would feel as if my body was trying to float up, something similar to astral projection, out-of-body experience. I was scared at first, but actually started to enjoy it. I felt it like at least 6 times or so in the mall, so up to this point now I still did not consider this a bad trip. It was kind of fun. As we got out of the mall back into the car and on our way back, it was getting dark, and I was getting really delusional. It was about 8:33 p.m. when I checked what time it was. I could barely make it out because my vision was blurred, so I decided to smoke a cigarette. I would light it, take a drag and go to take another one, and the cigarette would disappear like a magic act. Twice I tried to smoke these imaginary cigarettes and they would disappear. I would check the car floor for 5 minutes in case I dropped it. I did not want to start a fire, but found nothing. Finally it was like 9:10 p.m. a school night, so he dropped me off at my house. I staggered in the doorway with the main idea in my head of just getting some sleep. As I came in, my parents and my brother were sitting on the couch looking at me oddly. I was stumbling, my balance was shot, I was running into everything, almost stepping on my dog. They of course knew something was up. They knew it was not a marijuana high. They tried to ask me what it was. In my head I was saying Datura. Datura. But all I could do is mumble. They could not even understand me. I did not make any sense at all except to myself. They got really concerned and called my doctor. I tried to go upstairs, but would fall down at the second step. I started pacing back and forth, freaking out a little, running into objects, hallucinating. They tried to get me to sit down, but I kept trying to get up. My dad was holding me down. I started yelling and wanted to get up. They really were pushing me. I got extremely angry and was acting like someone who was insane. They then took me to the hospital. Although I have no recall of the trip there, I remember being held down by these people, doctors, nurses, family, and they would not let me get up. I was so furious I went into a rage. I felt like I was being imprisoned, so I started displaying combative behavior, punching, kicking, screaming at the top of my lungs. My set goal in my head at the time was freedom. I wanted to get out, but I could not. I was acting like a escaped mental patient. They then put me in restraints. I could not move my arms or legs. I was furious. I felt like they were enemies trying to kill me and I was defending myself. I woke up the next day in the hospital realizing what a mistake that drug was. I know that I will always remember this Datura adventure. Everything I wrote here is all I absolutely remember. My friend called me with the good news. Hey, I have some Jimson. Having read almost everything on Aeroid about Datura, I told him not to take any until I took a look at it. He agreed that was the best course of action. I went to his house over the weekend and crushed an entire seed pod, almost mature, seeds dark brown, in a mortar and pestle into a fine powder. I took it home and the day after next, I smoked a bowl, roughly 30 crushed seeds, and waited for its onset. After about 2 minutes, 11:56 p.m., I began to feel something, which is a sign that you have bought your ticket. There was still some Jimson in my pipe, so I smoked the rest of that too. After clearing the pipe of and remnants of Jimson, I read the Essential Confucius from cover to cover. I realized that I felt stoned and euphoric. I felt like I was almost lucid but knew I wasn't dreaming. I proceeded to draw a few pictures which are strange and beautiful upon examination. After listening to a few hours of music, I looked at the clock, 2:18 a.m., and decided it was time to catch some sleep. I brushed my teeth and got a bottled water from the fridge to take back to my room, considering I had finished half of one from earlier. After sitting on my bed just staring off into nothingness and anythingness, I realized I could see in the dark like when on acid. I imagine I had huge pupils, as was expected. I finally hit the pillow at 2:37 a.m., and closed my eyes. It seemed like only a few minutes passed by, before she appeared. The green temptress was on my damn bed, tempting me to sleep with her. And she was quite stunning as far as phantasms go. I pondered the idea, when I heard a voice in my head distinctly say no. I realized that I shouldn't go with her or do anything she tries to get me to do, and she swiftly disappeared. I didn't see her again that night. I remember falling asleep. I had a lucid dream, as it was easy to go from a state of being awake to a state of dreaming. I remember being in my old high school. I entered the school from the doors, walking in as the kids do for class. I was there to visit a teacher who had inspired me. There was an armed guard at the school entrance, a man in black with a bouncer/badass look to him holding an MP5 SWAT rifle slung over one shoulder, and another guard every 10 feet. All of the kids had guns as well, except I knew they were unloaded. This did not terrify me as it would in real life. I reasoned it was an omen of the impending future, a militaristic presence in all places of education at all times. I found myself walking down the halls past all the classrooms and teachers I didn't know. It was then that I realized that I was not in my old high school. I was in my church from 9 years ago. It hadn't changed from the past at all. I decided this was normal, all things considered. I found myself at the classroom, which turned out to be a desk in the middle of the hall. Of the teacher I had come looking for. Her name was Mrs. Lawrence, and I had memories of her teaching me how to understand algebra and how I had won many awards for the school academically. I informed her of these things, told her I had decided to major in math and that she inspired me. I immediately realized that I never had a teacher by that name, or had done any of the other things that I was so fond of. I noticed she was crying tears of joy. I realized, out of the blue, that I was dreaming. I became lucid. I shifted my dream state to an empty room with a black painted dresser drawer and turned it inside out with sheer willpower. I believe I also flew. After that, I have no idea. 9:30 a.m., the alarm goes off. I wake up, refreshed, which is weird since I usually don't wake up when my alarm goes off. I experience no blurred vision or any other side effects. This excluding, at noon, I became slightly depressed, then realized how good I really felt. Everything from there was great. I recommend this in moderation and with caution. Do not do any drug until you know as much as you can about it. And remember, dress cool in the summer, warm in the winter, stay high, and keep on trucking. I have only had one experience with Datura, and though I have considered taking Datura again, I am not sure I ever would. I remember my friend Sean was reading Lyceum articles and experiences about Datura, and he was looking for someone to join him in doing it. At the time, I was willing to try any drug without reading or researching about it at all. My logic was that I would be able to sense the equilibrium that my body could survive, and since my mind is not real, I don't have to worry about the survival of it. Anyway, my friend Sean found some Datura growing behind a small garbage dump near where he used to go school. Sean and I ground up some Datura and made tea out of it in Sean's tea strainer shaped like a little house. As usual, Sean chickened out and I became his more than willing guinea pig. After about 10 minutes out from drinking the vile potion, my mouth became extremely dry and my body was incredibly weak. I could not drink enough water. I did not even consider the fact that I may have poisoned myself. I kept flashing to a world where I was part of what seemed to be a slave train. Me and my fellow slaves were racked, as in wooden racks holding our hands next to our heads, and chained together and being forced to march. One of the times when I flashed back to the real world, I looked down at my hand to see that it was charred and oozing pus. The flashes continued until I very easily, and perhaps stupidly, went to sleep. The notable thing about this seemingly mundane trip was the reality of the flashes that I was experiencing. All of the other experiences that I have had, with the exception of DXM, have been surreal or unreal, whereas the vision of marching into oblivion for reasons that my altered self could not call up was so unbelievably vivid and detailed that it has forced me to question whether a place like that truly exists. I could feel the pain and desperation, both physical and mental, that someone in that situation must feel. It was beyond anything I had ever experienced. It was what I would call hell. Definitely not for the squeamish. I know that there are those who hear something like that and think, wow, cool. I can't wait until my seeds arrive. And that's a good way to end up in a stretcher, or better yet a coffin, or urn, etc., depending on your will. I am no chemist, but I have been told that Datura contains neurotoxin, and having experienced its effects firsthand, no pun intended, I would not suggest its use unless one is looking for a serious and sobering awakening. Datura is definitely not a recreational drug. I consider myself a psychonaut, but nothing could have ever prepared me for the 16 hours after I took the Datura. This is the most powerful hallucinogen I have ever experienced. I didn't even know it was possible to trip like this. This is put together with bits and pieces of my trip I have remembered over the past 3 years. My friend Kay and I had been given the task of house-sitting my friend C's house while she and her roommates went to a rave in South Carolina. We house-sat, smoked bud, and did whatever else it is that we did. When C arrived the next day, she gave me a little baggie filled with tiny black seeds in a crimson liquid. I asked her what it was, and she told me it was Jimson weed seeds. Now, I had no idea what that was. I know that I was very stupid for taking them without researching first. She said it was enough to make about 4 people trip nuts. Now, I thought that C's version of tripping nuts might have been a little different than mine, so Kay and I split the seeds up the best we could. I would say that we had about 60 each. Datura may be legal, but that does not mean that it is weak, or safe. Kay and I were feeling fine about a half an hour after taking seeds, so we decided to go to my house for some reason. We went to my house, and we started to feel extremely drunk. We laid down on the floor for hours and didn't say anything. I didn't feel like I was tripping at all. Somehow, I don't remember how, we got back to C's house and we fell asleep. When I awoke, I was feeling very strange, but not like I was tripping. God bless Bethany, my girlfriend at the time. She took my keys and drove me home. I got home and as soon as I walked in the front door, that's when it hit me, and it hit me really hard. Note, I would say that this is about 6 hours after I took the Datura. I was still living with my mother at the time and she knew that I was fucked up. I just told her that it was acid. My mom is cool, she knows that I have taken acid and smoked weed and done a whole lot of pharmaceuticals. So I went off to my room and I checked my email. I don't know how it does it, but it makes me forget that you are under the influence of a drug. Furthermore, everything seems extremely real. More real than reality, however weird that sounds. So, I'm checking my email, and all of a sudden a miniature version of myself appears on top of my monitor. I talked to my miniature self for a little while, and got some insight on why I do the things that I do. All of a sudden, our surreal conversation is interrupted by a commotion outside the apartment. I went and opened the door, and there were literally hundreds of people that I had known at one point in my life. My mother was in bed by this time. I let them all in. There were people from my past that I had forgotten about, and there were new friends as well. It was very strange, but that's not even the beginning. So we are all just chilling in my room, having conversations about things. All of a sudden, these people were getting very loud, so I kicked everyone out. Somehow, several of the people I kicked out made their way back into my room. People were appearing on one corner, and while I was talking to them, they would disappear and reappear on the other side of my room. This was getting very aggravating. It was completely out of control. All of a sudden my friend Superman appeared. I went to shake his hand, but felt nothing. Once again, everything seems extremely natural on Datura. I was discussing something with Superman, and he said, "Hey James, you want to see something cool?" I obliged, and Superman went to the center of my room. He pulled a 9-foot cross and a midget out of his pocket. The midget began to crucify him. When the midget was done, he jumped back into my friend's pocket. Superman looked directly at me, said, "Hey, watch this," tilted his head back, and exploded into ashes. I was freaking out. I went and got a platter and gathered all of the ashes onto the platter. I took them to the kitchen sink and ran water on them, and a new Superman grew right out of my sink. He said, "Wasn't that cool?" Then there was the guy with the Chick-fil-A cup for a head. This guy kept on dying, decaying, and being reborn in random places in my room. By this time, I'm getting really annoyed. So after he died for like the 50th time, I took his bones and was going to throw them outside, but his bones decayed to nothing before I could get them to the door. Superman saw that I was getting very annoyed, so he said a few magic words and the guy disappeared, and didn't come back. I have a 7-foot-tall tiki man type thing. It is a CD rack. He started to come to life and he and Superman were dancing around my room. This was getting to be way too much, so I invited both of them to go on a walk with me. So Superman, the tiki guy, and I were on a walk. I have no earthly idea where we went, but I lost them somewhere along the way. I came back to the house and noticed that my mother's car wasn't there. The sun was up, she must have been at work, I thought. I took my keys out to unlock the door, but they dissolved into a liquid in my hand. Come to think of it, almost everything I touched that night dissolved into a liquid. So I took out my ID and tried to break into my house. I tried for a long time and I finally realized that I was at the wrong apartment. I was at 904 instead of 304. So I went over to my apartment and the door was unlocked, so I went in. I sat down, and Bethany was there waiting for me. We had a long conversation and then my phone rang. It was Bethany. I looked over to the bed, and she was slowly fading to nothing. I was back together by this point, so I talked to Bethany for a minute and told her what had happened and how I had the most fucked up experience of my life the night before, and how everything seemed so real. Oh yeah, about apartment 904, the lady that lives there brought me my ID and said that it had been left in her door. I wasn't even about to try to explain that one. Before deciding to venture into the realm of Datura, I had read several reports of negative experiences, which were of course disconcerting. A common aspect of most of those train wrecks, however, was a lack of appropriate preparation concerning dosage. Many took too much, and of those who had bad trips on lower doses, the problem usually seemed to be inappropriate set/setting. Too often, Datura had tricked those who would ingest the substance into reducing, only to feel the onset in the emergency room. Bearing this in mind, I spoke to two others, C and N, who I would want to accompany me, both of whom agreed. I ordered amounts of Datura and Morning Glory seeds from a reputable source. When they arrived, I first tested myself for sensitivity to the Datura by consuming 10 seeds. I felt no noticeable effects, and decided this was evidence enough for me concerning safety. With C present, I prepared the Datura and Morning Glory. I placed 2½ teaspoons of Datura into a coffee grinder for upwards of a minute, then removed the product and placed it into a plastic bag. I counted 900 Morning Glory seeds, after having confirmed that they were not treated with toxic chemicals, and boiled them in water for about 15 minutes. The smell of bread pervaded C's kitchen. The tea that was produced was very crude, and intentionally so. The purpose of the Morning Glory was to counteract the negative possibilities of Datura as well as produce minor changes in perception, not to dominate the trip. The experience was intended to focus upon Datura, but since LSA is such an effective depressant, I assumed it should serve this purpose well. The night before the planned experience, C told me he had decided to back out, afraid to change his outlook on life. About an hour later, he asked me for directions to orally ingest Morning Glory seeds. I told him to chew 100 seeds to a paste and swallow, and he did so, at about midnight. His night was rather uneventful physically, but he did stare at his computer screen for 4 hours straight after taking a shower with handles that had swelled and melted. Ann and I were upset that C would not be joining us, but at least he had his own step away from reality. At about 12:25 on the day of ingestion, Ann and I went with L, our voluntary sitter, to N's house. I was of mediocre mindset, not terribly downtrodden from C's decision to remain absent. As 12:40 T came around, we ate 3/4 tablespoon each of Datura, and washed it down with approximately 225 milliliters of the Morning Glory tea, cold. I had estimated roughly that 225 milliliters would be 1/3 of the crude extract of LSA that had formed in the tea, and just potent enough to serve our purpose. The Datura tasted rather like some sort of nut, bitter to a point beyond my personal liking. The tea was somewhat bland, so we mixed in a bit of tang, which helped tremendously. Ingestion was complete in 5 minutes. After ingestion, Elle was reading, patiently awaiting our onset. I had warned her about the possibilities, and the extreme end of the scale, especially concerning the point at which to take us to the hospital, only when failing to do so would risk death. After putting Joe Satriani, Crystal Planet in the stereo system, I made a last-minute check on Datura to definitively answer some questions and had nothing terribly important. After resolving these last-minute issues, Ann and I sat down on couches in L's plain view and close to the music. At D+25 minutes, Ann suggested that we brew some Lipton tea. I personally dislike Lipton, but agreed. The water took quite some time to boil, and we had begun to feel the effects before it was done. D+30 minutes. Ann reports a brief pang in his stomach. I feel no nausea, but my eyes seem to hurt as though from pupil dilation. D+50 minutes. Our conversation has turned from normal to slow and lazy. My eyes definitely hurt now. Both of us have noticed that when we stop drinking the iced tea that was already in the refrigerator, our throats dry out quite quickly and become bothersome. D+65 minutes. Delirium begins to set in. Having turned up the burner temperature several times already, Elle declares that the tea is done, and pours us 2 glasses. Around this time, Crystal Planet finishes, so I put in Eric Johnson's Avia Musicom. Ann points out that his hands feel rather odd, and suggests that I rub mine together. Sure enough, It's actually quite a pleasant feeling. I realized that this was because all the moisture had been drained from our extremities. I had Elle test this theory by feeling my hand, and she confirmed that it was bone dry. D plus 75 minutes. Conversation has stopped. Both of us have decided to close our eyes to experience this. I personally feel very tired, assumedly from the morning glory. I had anticipated this, but did not expect such a strong sense of lethargy from such a crude extract. I remember thinking, however, that the onset was rather gentle and pleasurable. My stream of consciousness had changed from racing, as it normally is, to flowing. D plus 90 minutes. Heavy delirium has begun. Until around T plus 7, time becomes much less relevant and my memory more of an amalgamation of events. N turns off the main lighting, as our eyes have grown rather sensitive to it. Eventually, Avaya musicam ends, and as I realize this, I begin to worry. The silence and darkness are rather overpowering. I've started slipping in and out of sleep a la diphenhydramine, and a physical strangeness has overcome my body. The sensation is indescribable, but closer to the effects of nitrous oxide than anything I can recall. Elle reported later that I in particular was mumbling quite a bit. I remember the feeling that I was floating, not actually seeing myself in midair, but rather sensing being detached from the couch. At some point, Elle goes to the store to buy a few things, and brings us sugar cookies with a pink sticky frosting. Neither of us is particularly hungry, but to show gratitude we both pick one up the first time we're both awake. N bites first and immediately realizes something is wrong. I bite on mine to see what is wrong. Panic floods over me as I find myself unable to swallow, frosting stuck to the roof of my mouth. We both wash our mouths as well as possible with iced tea, barely escaping death by sugar cookie. I eat the rest of mine, consuming 4 ounces of iced tea in the process, but N doesn't even bother touching his. While I'm still lucid, I load Dream Theater's Awake into the CD player, and realize that incoordination is more present now than ever. I don't actually fall down, but move as quickly as possible back to the safety of the couch. I recall a certain very pleasurable experience occurring for a while even as the flying sensation persisted. I closed my eyes once, and noticed that what I was seeing on my eyelids was an exact image of what I was seeing with open eyes. I tested it by moving my eyes around while closed, and realized that it was still functioning. With no transition that I noticed, or felt necessary, I was suddenly projected into a sort of moving environment behind closed eyes. Everything was abstract, mostly landscape colors and thoughts floating around, but I was constantly moving, flying really. Around this time, Elle asks if it is alright to leave. Hearing no objections, obviously, she parts. After waking up again, I realize that we were once again left in silence and darkness, but this time without a guide. I knew that Elle had left, and was unconcerned in that respect, but I was under the strange delusion that N was dead. Death, it seemed, really was in that room right then. I could just feel it, that the dread force had stolen N's life. The atmosphere, I now believe, brought this on. Silence may not be beneficial to Datura experiences. It could only have been the morning glory and my own chemically induced lethargy that kept me from dialing 911, or perhaps I kept from doing so out of fear as well. At about 8 p.m., Elle returned. We were both still only partly cognizant, but awake to some extent, and we felt that the trip had climaxed and we would shortly be safe to function in society once again. We left N's house and returned to my own. N and I went to a LAN arena with the afterglow of the evening. There was little social interaction, and we left at about 10 p.m. Later, N told me that he heard that night rather realistic voices while lying in bed. Neither of us had terribly persistent dilated pupils, nor did our dry throats last through the morning. Overall, I would recommend Datura in low dosages to any brave psychonauts once, but personally would not experience it again for quite a while. One very important thing to remember for the combination experience remains: I don't know which substance caused this, but N and I both had severe trouble urinating during the course of the trip. Make sure you relieve yourself before ingestion. My final suggestion to any who are considering Datura is to be certain of your dosage. Do your research and you won't have to worry, did I take too much? Or I don't feel anything. It might be tempting, but never take too much Datura or you could spend the night in the hospital or morgue. The strongest drug. I have tried many drugs over my life, but nothing can compare to the sheer power of Datura. It was August, a hot summer night. I was with 3 friends, and with no cannabis we had no idea what to do that night. We eventually decided on going fishing. So we all jumped into my friend's car, and made our way to the coast. We then decided not to go fishing, I can't remember the reason, but instead we decided on picking snails, later to cook and eat back at my friend's. We also bought 3 bottles of wine at the petrol station. Now almost arriving back at my friend's, he stated talking about devil's weed, Datura. I had no idea what it was, so we all agreed on the idea of taking it. It stopped off my small garden and took 4 to 6 flowers. Back at my friend's, Datura tea was boiled. It took half an hour to boil, and my friend served 4 large glasses of the brown liquid. We all downed it completely at the same time. After 10 minutes we all considered that it was nothing, and that it had no effect, but slowly I started getting a high feeling. I felt dizzy and hard to walk. I tried moving my feet right, but they would move in the opposite direction. I couldn't stop laughing. I would glance on the floor and start laughing. It kept getting stronger and stronger, until I just crept around the house on my feet because I could no longer walk. I found it very hard to stop laughing, and my vision became slightly blurred. I don't remember seeing my friends that often in the house. I could see them floating around popping red and yellow bubbles every now and then. The effects kept getting stronger and stronger. I rolled a joint but then it just disappeared from my grasp. I would pick things up and they would just disappear from my hands. I then made it to a bedroom, alone. I looked at the sofa and saw my friend sat down smoking, but every time I looked away, then looked back, one of my friends would disappear one by one. Then all of a sudden people just walked out of the cupboards, and passed right by me as if I was in a shopping center. It eventually gave up and I somehow made it into the shower. With all my cloths on I turned on the shower to watch a green liquid flowing and hitting me, then I would look behind me and see naked women. I made it back to the main room where my 3 friends were all dancing in an erratic way, stomping along the floor and head rocking forwards the backwards, but there was no music playing. I too joined them to some kind of mute concert, but then I looked back and they would disappear. I eventually fell asleep on the floor, and either dreamed or awoke and saw big bright colorful snails like the ones we had been picking earlier roam around the room. I somehow walked the 2-kilometer trip back home, not remembering a single thing, just that I arrived with no hair, even though I had hair. I was still under heavy influence and I just lost control, not remembering a thing I did until the next morning. By far Datura was the most powerful thing I have ever consumed. I had no control over my high and just followed it through. There are many things I don't remember that night, just a blackness. The following next 5 to 6 days I had big dilated pupils and blurry eyesight, and had insomnia and wild flashbacks. I can't even look at snails as I feel sick towards them, and the idea of eating them makes me vomit. Datura did affect me in lots of ways, but one day I am sure to repeat the experience. Portugal, 2007. My knowledge on this drug was of a small proportion. Every Friday night my friends and I had a gathering, the usual teenage drunkenness, doing what we do best. At 1 a.m. or so, the party was broken up by the host's mother. I was to stay at one of my very good mate's house, but instead I ditched him for a night I would never forget. As we were leaving the party my friend M said to the 3 of us in the car, "Datura taking time." My first reaction was no way, as I said I have little knowledge of this drug. As the good friends they are, they changed my mind within minutes. We went to one of M's friends and made a very potent yellow tea and had 20 times of what we should have. By the way, I have never tripped before. The glass was tall and seemed forever to drink. After 20 minutes of sitting with M, A and I said I have to go home. He wasn't thinking straight after 16 beers and 1 large cup of Datura. M and I started our treacherous walk to the car. Within the space of 20 meters it felt as if I gained 20 kilograms. I told my fellow intoxicated friend how I was feeling and he agreed and we both struggled to make it up the stairs. We both had the drives like a mofo, so we stopped for refreshments. I bought M&Ms and M got a drink of lemonade. Hero would note, driving while intoxicated, tripping, or extremely sleep deprived is dangerous and irresponsible because it endangers other people. Don't do it. We drove for another 5 minutes and got to my friend's Alex's house. Out of the 3 I was the first to trip. We stopped the car a house away and told Alex to get out. Whilst they were talking I was looking at a house lit by the moonlight and I saw an old lady spinning wool. I blinked and thought, fuck yeah, that looks sick. As soon as I blinked and looked at her again she was standing. I told my friends and they just laughed. I was all wowed out at the fact that I was tripping. I rubbed my eyes and then she was walking towards me with cats in her hands and on her back. I turned to the person who was driving, and said, "Drive man, go go go." They had no idea what was happening. We turned around ready to go home when we heard a "let me out." We said, "Oh fuck, Alex hasn't gotten out yet." He got out and ran home. We drove home, got out and went to bed. This wasn't a good idea. I almost fell asleep when my friend M flicked the light on and said shut up. He couldn't say his T's. I don't think I was even talking. As soon as he turned the light off I passed out. And a few days later this is what I was told I did. 1. Dropped a pair of glasses. My friend picked them up and I said don't worry, you can keep them, Indiana Jones, don't worry about the price. 2. Looked at a photo album with no photos in it and complimenting my friend's mom on how swell the photos were. 3. My friend's mom was asking me for the time. So, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pocket watch. I looked confused and just put it away. I didn't have a pocket watch. 4. My Datura taker's brother was looking after me and I kept lighting a cigarette and then saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to smoke inside." I didn't have smokes. 5. Slapped the walls and laughed. 6. Kept on insisting that I go home. My home is 20 kilometers away and I was going into a cupboard thinking it was the front door. 7. Consistent talking to myself, and when my friend's mom asked if I was okay, I just laughed at her and carried on talking. Those were only few things I did for 6 hours before my father came. I was found by Am's mom in the kitchen at 2 o'clock in the morning with the light off talking to myself. After me entertaining them for those funny 6 hours she called my dad. He came and took me to the hospital. On the way I was talking about a party and saying stuff like, "Dad, did you have a wicked time there?" Well, I did. I can't remember walking into the hospital, but I do remember me keep getting in and out of my bed and walking around. I remember me talking to a little black girl, and when I tried to get out she would always say, "No, you have to stay here or you'll get in trouble." I also wrote a 5-page novel. I didn't have any utensils to write it with. Then I realized that I had no paper and then said, "Wow, that was wicked." I was still holding my pen at this point in time and for some reason I threw it down. A few seconds later I wanted it back, so I went looking for it. It was nowhere to be seen. I had my friends come in and talk to me, but they just kept on going under my bed and disappearing. I went out and asked my caretaker if there was a door under my bed. He looked at me and said, "No, you're hallucinating again." I replied with an "oh yeah" and walked casually off to my room. When the doctor came in to measure my heart rate, he asked me to take off my t-shirt. I didn't want to because there were 2 girls in my room sitting down. And I said, "Nah, I don't want to. I'm a skinny little white bitch and I didn't want them to see it." He then said, "There's no one in the room." I looked behind me and they were gone. So I did what the doctor asked. He put these little stickers on my chest and put wires on the ends. After he was done I asked if I could have the stickers. He replied, "Yeah, sure." I put them on my shoes. I remember me talking to my shoes. I said to my shoe, "Man, what's wrong with your face?" My shoe gave me an evil look and I realized that it was just the stickers making a face. I laughed and continued staring and I continued talking to them. I brushed my legs as if someone was sitting on me and I said, "Man, what are you doing? Get off me." Then I think my doctor came in and asked if I wanted to watch Foxtel. I said yeah sure and I walked in, sat down and flicked through the channels as fast as I could because there was nothing but sport on. Then my 2 good mates P and Gordo came into the room. I said, "Oh man, I've waited so long, man, where have you guys been?" They sat down and asked how I was. I said yeah good, and we casually talked for 10 or so minutes and then we started arguing about the channels. They looked at me and walked off. I ran out to the front desk and asked if they saw 2 guys walk out of this room and if so, which way they went. They replied, "You're hallucinating again." "Oh yeah," I replied and walked off to my bed. They came in and said, "You're going to have to stay another night." I really didn't want to, really didn't want to. So I thought play it straight. It was so hard, but I kind of pulled it off, and they let me out. I remember my dad coming in, but I don't remember walking out. Dad and I were on our way out of the hospital in the car, when I started hallucinating again. I started eating noodles that weren't there. I also started smoking and then I dropped the cigarette and wiped it off me. At this point my dad was like, "What are you doing?" I apologized, "Oh sorry Dad," and for some reason I craved coffee. The strange part was that I thought it was outside of the car, so I went to pull the door open. We were driving around 130 kph down the highway when my dad shouted at me. I realized what I was doing and locked the door. The day I got out it was my best friend's birthday party. I wanted to go but my father wouldn't allow it. So, I made a deal and I could only go for 10 minutes. On the way down I was still tripping out. I saw Dementors, you know, the ones out off Harry Potter. They were flying behind trees. I also saw old ladies in the middle of the road. I told my dad to slow down, but they just seemed to disappear a meter away from the car. I went into the party to see my friends. They asked the usual questions like, "Are you okay?" I was talking to my friend P and I saw a man behind him. I said, "I thought I saw someone behind you," and after saying my hellos and goodbyes I left to go get some pizza. My dad left to go in and get it whilst I was still sat in the car. I looked in an antique store and there was a little ghost of a girl. She was black and white and walking towards me with a knife. I wasn't scared but more intrigued. She kept walking towards me, still staring. She walked into the car and vanished. Oh, and when I was in the hospital I started eating my hand. I wouldn't take what I did back. It was a great experience, also a great story. What I would take back would be me getting caught. This is my experience with Datura. It is defiantly not a pleasant one. One in which I will turn you away from using this drug. It all started one day when my friend John moved back from Las Vegas with a trash bag full of this stuff. The fruit, or whatever you would call it, was the size of a baseball. We didn't really know what part of the plant would be the most effective in making the utterly disgusting tea, so we split open the fruit and seeds and boiled it all. My mom witnessed the whole process and said we were stupid. After 10 minutes we poured the tea into a 42-ounce cup. We split it in half. We sat down on the couch with no idea what this tea was about to do to us. 11:30 p.m., 15 minutes after drinking the tea we began to feel very drunk and my guitar sounded very unusual. John started laughing uncontrollably and kept insisting that he need to take a piss. When I told him to take a piss, he pissed on my bathroom floor. I then realized I had gotten myself into something I wouldn't want anybody else to experience ever. After about 2 hours of watching John drink out of imaginary drinking fountain, picking peach pits off the ground and gluing my car keys to the wall with my mom's nail glue that he had found. 4 a.m., I woke my grandma up, crawling to her bed military style. I told her that we had drank some tea and John is hallucinating and we need to take him home. We drove 50 miles and the whole time John was trying to jump out of the car. He had removed the headrests from the seats and tried to throw them out the window. For some reason or another I wasn't as fucked up as John, but that was soon to change. When we arrived, I could not explain to my grandmother where he lived. We turned around and headed back to my grandmother's house. On the way we dropped John off at a friend's house because my grandmother could not handle us both at the same time. 6 a.m., this is about the time I could not distinguish my imaginary friends from real people. I began to talk to people that weren't there the entire following day. The fact that they would talk to me for 5 minutes and then disappear was not unusual for me. I sat on my bed for hours. When I finally got up, I asked my grandmother how long I had been sleeping. She told me I had been sitting on my bed staring at the wall for several hours. Meanwhile, John had escaped. He went to the neighbor's house, walked in and turned their TV on and began to dance. The cops arrived. They asked him what his name was. He said John. They proceeded to ask questions. Where do you live? His response, everywhere. By that time my friend had begged the police to let him go and not press the issue. The police told my friend if they ever saw him in town again he would be arrested for sure. If your cup of tea is to black out for several hours, hang out with your imaginary friends for 2 days, your pupils dilated for 3 days, very painful, I still suggest never to drink or eat anything that has to do with this plant. Your imaginary friends may not always be nice. But I must say the most interesting thing about my experience was the fact that the people I was seeing and disappearing was not unusual to me whatsoever. If you have any questions, feel free to email me and I can explain it in more detail. Datura can only be described as a poison. The delirium it creates almost qualifies as a near-death experience. Yeah, I see some amazing stuff, but it turns me into a raving lunatic. All perception of reality is destroyed, leaving me in a world where fantasy is indistinguishable from fact. Here is my walk through the Valley of the Dead. Here is my inferno. It was a warm summer night in Austin, Texas, and the city was full of vibrant life and unseen possibilities. My friends and I were having a laid-back party. They were sipping cold Keystone Light and smoking on some Mary Jane, but I was out for bigger and better things. You see, I am somewhat of a hallucinogenic connoisseur and am always on the search for a good free trip. It just so happened that I had seen a nice big flowering patch of Jimson weed that was just down the block. So I jogged down there with a friend and quickly harvested an acceptable amount with my pocket knife. When we got back to the house I went straight for the kitchen. Having done this little procedure before, I quickly cut open the seed pods and removed all the seeds. After discarding the outside skin, I chopped up the leaves and flowers into small pieces and added them to the seeds. I then boiled 3 cups of water and mixed the Jimson wheat in. I let it boil for about 30 minutes, until the water was reddish brown and tasted horribly bitter. To improve the taste, I had brought this strange kind of blueberry herbal tea my mom buys. It worked beautifully and the concoction tasted awesome. I knew that with the amount of seeds I had used that I wouldn't need more than a cup to get the desired effect. However, I was high and it tasted good, so I ended up drinking 2 cups. Oops. Now, normally I am very cool-headed when it comes to doing drugs. Substances that make some people freak out merely arouse my curiosity. But this situation was quite different. I was well aware that under normal circumstances Datura takes several hours to begin its black magic. Naturally, it bothered me when the drug began to take effect 5 minutes after I finished my second cup. My mouth became extremely dry and I lost my balance as if I was drunk. My throat got so dry that it was hard to breathe and I found myself sitting on the bathroom floor gasping for a breath. An older friend of mine whose judgment I trusted told me I had taken too much and could die from doing that. So it was that I decided to contact my parents and go to the hospital. So far I had seen no visuals, but after I reached the emergency room they began to come on intensely. It began in the waiting room. I was sitting down watching some people across the room when the walls around me seemed to expand, and the room became much larger. The woman sitting close to me appeared much farther away. While I was pondering this development, a man in a white suit came and led me and my parents to a curtained-in hospital bed, where he had me lie down. Supposedly, they had to inject charcoal into me as a counteraction of the drug, and I was required to lie still while they did this. Little did they know I was in another world. All at once the room around me faded, and I was driving in my car. My mom later described seeing my hands snap up as if to grab a steering wheel. I saw a street with weird houses that were stretched up towards the sky like some invisible vacuum was sucking them upwards. I could hear my mom talking to me from my passenger seat, but when I looked over, the seat was empty. I heard strange voices calling to me from far away. Then suddenly it was all gone, and I was in the hospital room once again. Just as I was beginning to return to reality, I noticed mounds of 3-foot-long neon green glowing worms squirming violently on the ceiling. I stared up in amazement and awe, finally peeling my eyes away just as some strange man in tights and puffy medieval attire stepped into view. Pure insanity. I began to drift through different visions and scenarios, some far too obscene to retell. I explored different horrific worlds, conversing with deceased companions and unholy ghosts. No meaning and no explanation, save that reality and imagination entwined with one another to produce an inexplicable dream. A dark and lucid dream that had to be experienced but will never reoccur. I woke up the next day a sane individual once again, fully aware that I had just lived through the most insidiously powerful hallucinogen that nature provides. These fantastically complex nightmares are meant for one time and one time only. I'm glad I did it, but I'd be a fool to do it again. I have dried the above plant individually with success. I have combined lotus and cannabis. What I imagine ecstasy is like, extremely pleasurable, total ecstasy. I welled up with joy with no downtime the next day or, hell, since then. I have also combined Datura and cannabis, an intense high, more than just getting stoned. Pseudo-lifelike hallucinations, some scary, but when I control my mind, I realize I will be fine. I finally decided to try all 3 at once. I made roughly 2 grams of the magic mixture, 40% lotus, flower petals, 45% cannabis, good shit, 15% Datura, crushed seed. I had put in some tool at a moderate volume, so as to hide the sounds of my experiment from others. I also had a full water bottle, knowing that with the weed and the Datura especially, I would need a lot of water. I lit some Bob Marley brand incense that smells fantastic. I left the lights in my closet on, where I was, and all other lights were off. I filled the pipe, lit a candle. I light my lighter off a candle so that it doesn't make that familiar sound, and prepared my mind for the experience, reassuring myself that I can retain control of anything bad that may happen, and I do. D0. I took 2 long and deep hits. The pipe was packed tight and stayed lit quite well. The lotus helps that too. I began to feel something almost immediately. I went to my bed to grab a pillow to sit on and returned to the closet. I took a hit roughly every 2 minutes until the bowl was cashed. I got a good drink of water. D plus 34 minutes. I began to load a second bowl. I placed my pipe in my AOL container, you know, the metal one in the mail. They are great, next to the magic stuff. I sat back down. I began to pay more attention to detail. I knew this because it took 5 minutes just to stop looking at my arm and the design of my pipe and set it down. I explored my current state of mind. How am I feeling? Damn good. Am I hallucinating? Almost. Am I still having a good trip? Oh yeah. After doing that, I decided to smoke more. I currently felt like I was Datura stoned, a solid stone, nice in its own way, and at the same time, I was euphoric and ecstatic like the Lotus cannabis mix above. D plus 46 minutes. Bowl number 2 loaded and ready. My mouth was constantly hanging open as if I was in constant awe. I believe I was. I lit the bowl and took a deep hit. I exhale and begin to feel the signs of cottonmouth. I quench again. I took another hit. I hold. I feel like the longer I hold it in, the higher up the staircase I go. I exhale and the flowers start coming out at the walls. My eyes are open. There are faint red and green flowers in a tiled pattern everywhere. I realize I have the power to make any hallucination materialize at will. Of course, being a lonely male, a naked chick soon emerges from nothing. She is as real as me. Yet at the same time, I secretly knew she was most likely the temptress. Yes, she exists. I have always seen her while on Datura. I still maintained control. I took another few hits, feeling more and more like I was climbing a roller coaster, that feeling of expectation, sort of, and adrenaline rush right before the coaster plummets, except I never plummeted. I take another drink of water and stand up. Whoa, always stand up slowly and make sure you have something solid to hold onto. I caught my bearing for a good minute before trying to walk. D plus 56 minutes. Walking was of utmost oddity. My head was not part of my body physically, just attached by electromagnetic force. This made balance difficult if one did not concentrate. Each footstep felt like a tree being uprooted and then rooted again when it found ground. I felt alien, but not fearful. The ecstasy was somewhat diminished by the other forces in my brain. Before I left the closet, I realized that I could watch myself move from within my own brain, third-person perspective with accuracy as well. This felt like exploring the core motor skill area of my brain. I could feel every living part of my entire body. On a whim I could flow within my blood vessels, or exhale myself from my lungs. Still quite pleasant and relaxed. Humongous pupils, night vision. D plus 59 minutes. I have a good sense of time and therefore don't wear a watch, plus, I can't wear any digital watches anyways. I alter them by just wearing them, family trait. I am outside my closet and hear music. I know that Tool Enema is in the stereo, but what I hear, and subsequently dance to, is not Tool or anything I have ever heard. I danced, which I never do, for what seemed like a long time. Just standing there, moving like a goon. Any observer would not know what to make of me. Suddenly, it's time to go to the bathroom. And piss a gallon or so of water. Damn, I'm thirsty. D plus 1 hour and 7 minutes, or is it 17 minutes, or is it 37? I think I'm losing that sense of time. Drink water, decide I'm going to finish my bowl. Remember to act normal when going outside my room. Also remembered to boot computer when walking by. Oh, I'm still seeing those damned flowers everywhere, they never left. I take about 2 more hits, who knows. I remember becoming extremely paranoid that I was surrounded by spiders. I am an arachnophobe, not as much after this though, so that is not good. I overcame that and I never really became frantic or fearful. I also hallucinated a scorpion about the size of a beer can to my right. It jumped out and stung my ass. I could even feel the stinger inside my body and a release of something into my body. It was scary at first, but far freaking out too. It rocked. From there, I remember seeing myself sitting down and smoking my pipe while that is exactly what I was doing. Everything was disassociated third person, except for the spiders and the scorpion. I could see all the parts of my body, including the eye on my forehead made of white light, and my eyes that appeared to be Goku big. I remember not much else. I know it was an excellent trip and it was pleasant. I recommend to all those explorers out there. Always research the drugs you intend to take. Never do any drug with the "yeah man, let's get stoned" attitude, and remember to never be afraid. It's in your head, and of your spirit. Peace. Hello. My first and only Datura experience happened in early November shortly after Halloween. I previously submitted a report to Erode on this experience, but it was subpar and written with very little time to reflect on what actually went on during this trip. First of all, let me say that I do not consider myself an experienced tripper. In fact, My total drug experiences over 2 years probably amounts to less than 50. This does not include caffeine or alcohol. Anyway, even if you are incredibly experienced, I do not think you could handle this trip. It is literal insanity. How then would I find such a substance? Well, as fate has it, luck just smiled upon me. I had been reading Carlos Castaneda and was very curious about Datura. The next day I went to school and asked a friend if he knew of any rare drugs in the area. He said that Paul was giving out devil's weed. In the next 10 minutes I had located Paul, and indeed, he was giving away seeds of the Datura plant. He gave me around 250 seeds. They were very small and brownish/black. The next day I took 50 seeds to see if anything would happen. Nothing happened, and I was very disappointed, but I thought perhaps a larger dose would highly increase my chances of a good trip. Is that possible with Datura? Anyway, I went to bed and thought nothing of it. 2 days later I had the opportunity to try out Datura in my friend's house, who was having a birthday party. There would be me and 6 other people, and we had the house largely to ourselves. Very good for being babysat. I arrived with my 200 seeds in a plastic baggie about 6 in the evening. We exchanged greetings and I went inside and we basically chilled for a few. Around 8 everyone had showed up and we walked over to a variety store to pick up some energy drinks. I have a very high tolerance to caffeine, so I was rather unconcerned about one drink having a huge effect on me in combination with the seeds. We got back to his house, I drank my energy drink and got the seeds. 'Twas the moment of truth. After reading many experiences I decided the best method was to make tea and then eat the seeds for good measure anyway. I made the tea, and it does take a long time to really get color, about 10 to 15 minutes, so give it a few. The tea itself just tasted like hot water. The seeds however tasted like utter crap, except they were a bit spicy. It was an interesting taste, but the texture was very, very horrible. At this point it was 9 o'clock and I felt nothing. I was disappointed. I should have known that my town didn't have good drugs. Alas, I was wrong. I was coming up and just didn't know it. The come up is very, very long. 3 to 4 hours I would estimate. Coming up is kind of weird too. You think you're getting the Datura effect so you won't talk or you might laugh a bit. It feels very genuine. This is nowhere near to the real trip. I'm not sure if everyone laughs and can't talk when coming up, so this might be attributed to the energy drink. It's about 10 o'clock, and wow. Can you say holy dry mouth? This is the worst dry mouth I have ever experienced. No question about it, you have to keep water in a glass with you almost constantly to bear it. My friends asked me if I wanted to go for a walk. I declined, saying that I was going to sleep instead. This is a mistake. Do not go to sleep, it will fuck up your sense of time even more than what will happen anyway. I'm not sure if I slept or not, but I woke up at 12 o'clock, and that was the last time I looked at the clock. Dear God, the next thing I knew it felt like I was hit with a rocket of some magical substance, because I started getting trails. I wasn't even aware it was an effect of the Datura. I went upstairs while I still could because it was just starting. I remember Daniel asked me how I was doing. I said it's just starting, man. Just starting. He kind of laughed, but for me it wasn't really funny. I found it incredibly scary that I was in fact going to have this outlandish experience. I got myself another glass of water, or so I thought. I was later informed I was in fact filling up nothing, and I went to sit down by Andy, Anthony and Gage, who were all playing Xbox. All I remember is that they wanted me to play too, so I did. About 5 minutes after I was playing Xbox I looked at my hands because they felt funny. I discovered I wasn't holding anything, I was just twiddling my thumbs as if I was actually playing Xbox. From this point on I cannot accurately say much, except things got really fucked up. Every time I went to go to the bathroom I was unable. If anything did come out it was very little. I remember being amused by the ducks in the wall. The only rational thought I had the whole night is I should go down the stairs sitting down so I wouldn't fall. I have no clue how I even managed to remember that I had to be careful because I might fall down. I guess I thought I was normal. At one point I was downstairs and Anthony wanted to go to sleep. He said, "I'm shutting the lights now, you won't be able to see." My first response was, "That's fine, just let me finish my cactus." He kind of looked at me like I had just said something off the wall, which I did, and he told me again. My second response was, "Nah dude, I have good night eyes." He shut off the lights anyway, and I went upstairs. The next experience I remember is that my friend's stepdad came out of the wall and told me to be quiet because he needed to wake up at 5 in the morning to catch an early octopus. This made perfect sense, and the whole night was spent in fear of waking up someone who wasn't there because they had to catch the early morning octopus. Upstairs some of my friends were still awake, so they accounted some of the stuff that I did to me. I would constantly go to the bathroom, and peek my head around the corner, almost guilty of the fact I was in the bathroom. Another thing that occurred was I ended up stripping down to my boxers. I have no clue why I did, but I did. They told me to put on some clothes, so I donned my leather jacket. Boxers and a leather jacket must be quite the sight. I went into the kitchen a few times. I would pick up batteries that were lying around and drop them for no reason. When asked what I was doing, I yelled, "It's okay. I've been doing this for 10 years. A few hours later, it was 7 in the morning and I was still going nuts. They tried to convince me to put my clothes back on. They found my pants in the dog cage and gave them to me. I insisted they were dirty, so I tried to wash them in the sink, by hand. They stopped me and told me to put them on, so I did, on my head. They tried to get me to do it again. This time I simply asked them, "But what's the average?" My friend responded with 7, and that answer seemed to suffice. Finally out of the house and being walked home by my 2 friends, I was feeling normal. Apparently this is farthest from the truth. More than once I would walk onto someone's porch and go, "It's okay. I know these people." We were playing hide and go seek. Luckily they got me off most porches before anyone noticed I was there. Another notable thing that happened on the way home was I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, stared at the ground and said in the most reasonable tone ever, "Oh, it's one of those games. I guess I can play it later then." When I got home, my dad answered the door. I think the conversation we're about to have confused him more than anything ever could. My father asked me why I was home early. I said, "Oh, I was just getting Advil for Dylan. Dylan was hosting the party." My dad asked why. I responded, "Oh, well, he has a headache, you see." I don't remember saying this. I'm going by what my parents told me. Basically I kept stumbling over myself as to who I was getting Advil. It switched between 3 different people and sometimes I would trail off into nonsense about how girls aren't allowed at parties anyway, and I don't know why my dad was worried. He finally asked, "You seem pretty spacey. I'm surprised you made it home okay." My response was, "Yeah, me too. It's a long walk." Apparently I thought it was best to agree with him in the state I was in. Needless to say, my parents still have no explanation for that time I came home spewing gibberish. They don't know how to detect anything besides drunkenness or highness. Either way, I went and slept for 8 hours. I can't really sum it up because I hardly remember it. If you do it, be careful. Be very careful.